Proba 1, 2, proba 1, 2. Proba 1, 2. Proba 1, 2, proba 1, 2. Proba 1, 2. Proba 1, 2, proba 1, 2. Good morning. This is Stevan. Hello. How are you? Very well. Very well. I'm very delighted to be part of this event today. Thank you very much. Can you please allow me? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this lovely introduction. Can you please just confirm me that you see me and hear me well? Thank you very much. I would right now I will share my screen. I hope that you see my screen right now. Great. So just let me fix this. Great. So, dear faculty members, dear students, dear young researchers, dear all, it is my great pleasure and honor to participate in today's event, which is actually a third joint event organized together by GLA University and AIDASCO. I would like to use this opportunity to sincerely thank Professor Dr. Kamal Sharma for initiating and organizing today's event. And I would also like to thank the Professor Dr. Pradeep Singh for his efforts in this organization as well. And I would also like to mention and thank to Professor Ruby Singh for initiation of collaboration between GLA University and AIDASCO. So today's lecture is focused to writing a good research paper. And let me say for the beginning that the road to a good research paper is long and tough challenge, but it is definitely worth of it, because it is a special feeling when you see your name as a co-author of some paper published in a good research journal. So, when you see a paper published in some journal, you actually see just the tip of the iceberg. There are many stages that have to be fulfilled in order to have your paper published. And today, you will be introduced to some of the most important aspects of successful paper publication. So before we start, let us go through all of these stages that have to be fulfilled in order to have your paper published. What is actually a motivation to publish a paper? Well, the development of new scientific and technological achievements is not possible without publishing of the scientific results. So this lecture aims to introduce students and young researchers to some of the essential steps leading to the good research paper. Let us see what are the stages before paper publication. So in my opinion, we have 5 main stages, although we can make some sub-stages here. And the first stage is, of course, collection of the scientific results. This is a part where you perform a lot of experiments, do your calculations, and I would describe this part of your career as blood, sweat, and tears. In this stage 1, you actually try to find something new, to explain something new, and in this part of your career, in this stage 1, you are actually focused only to the laboratory or only to your computer where you perform calculations. You don't think about stages that come after collection of scientific results, and trust me, there are many stages after stage 1. So in stage 2, once we collect our scientific results, we want to publish them and make available to everybody. But before we publish them, we have to make a proper selection of scientific journal. And that is actually tough challenge, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of scientific journals, but not all of them are relevant or scientifically sound. So if you want to have an adequate attention of the scientific community, you have to publish papers in relevant and sound journals. So to make a proper journal selection, you have to be familiar with what is called journal metrics, and that is what we're going to do today. Stage 3 is a manuscript preparation. It is just one of the stages, although many young researchers think that this is the only and the core one stage, but it is not. In stage 4, once you prepare everything, once you collect all of the documents, once you prepare cover letter and supplementary materials, you have to submit your manuscript to a selected journal. And even a stage 4 is sometimes complicated, and we will touch this topic as well today. And stage 5 is publication of a paper. So once you submit your paper in stage 4, you wait for the decision of reviewers and editor-in-chief, And if it is a positive review, and if you receive a positive answer from editor-in-chief, your paper will be published. But trust me when I say you that stage 5 and publish the paper is not an end of your journey, because once you publish your results, I think you should promote them. You should promote your paper on social networks. And we will touch that a little bit today also. So these are the stages. And the real question is how to make a good research paper. Well, one way is to adopt what is known as reverse engineering principle. What we're going to do. So we're going to take one good research paper, which is an end product in this stage 5. And then we are going to examine it, and we will use our observations and conclusions about the essential elements of that paper, and we will give our best to make a paper which looks like that paper published in a good research journal. But then we have another question. The another question is where to look for a good end product, where to look for a good research paper, because remember what I said, there are hundreds of thousands of scientific journals and not all of them are relevant. And that is why we need to understand some fundamental elements of journal metrics. We have to learn, firstly, we have to learn to identify a good scientific journal. So before speaking about a structure of a good research paper, we will first introduce ourselves with these stages, because I think that students and young researchers will understand the road to a good research paper if they truly understand these stages. We will not touch the stage 1 because that depends on your research area and what you're going to do actually regarding scientific activities, but we will go over through stages 2, 3, and 4 in details. And the aim actually of this lecture is to understand these stages, and once you understand these stages, the elements of a good research paper will be much more clearer. So let us start. This is the structure of this lecture. So in part 1, we will be introduced with journal metrics. We will understand terms and quantities such as impact factor, quartile ranking, site score. In part 2, we will be discussing something about manuscript submission. We will understand what is peer review and what it means to have a revision of your paper. And in part 3, we will deal with the manuscript structure. So let us start with the part 1. So when you speak about journal metrics, the first question of young and inexperienced researchers or students is, what is journal metrics after all? Well, journal metrics is an area focused to the development and calculation of parameters which indicate how strong scientific journal is. So when you investigate something, when you investigate some mechanism or some phenomena, you want to identify which are the quantities which describe that mechanism or which describe that phenomena. And the same thing is with the journals, because after so many years of existence of scientific methods, so many journals emerged on the market, and it is necessary somehow to classify them. And today, there are, of course, many quantities which can be used for classification of journals, but the most frequently used are impact factors, quartile ranking, and site score. Of course, there are many more. Some of them will be mentioned in this lecture, but these seem to be the most frequently used. So the impact factor is a quantity which is one of the oldest journal metric quantities. It has been defined in 1992. It is based on the citations of papers in other papers and journals, and it is a quantity calculated and provided by the journal citation reports, which is published by Clarivate Analytics. Site score is, someone would say, something similar to impact factor. Indeed, it is similar in those terms that it is also based on citations. It is one of the youngest journal parameters. It is introduced in 2016, and it is calculated by Scopus, which is a specific and unique service provided by Elsevier company. And then we have quartile rankings. Quartile rankings are division of journals in quartiles in covered subfields with respect to the value of selected journal parameter. And we have journal ranking score. We have quantities provided by these companies and by these, let's say, entities, because Scopus is company, Clarivate is company, but the journal research, JRS, provided by SCI Major, is actually some kind of entity. And when you have those values, you division your journals according to the values of these parameters to quartile rankings. So, before we introduce in details the definitions of impact factor, side score, and quartile rankings, I want to emphasize one thing. To get the right picture about the scientific journal, it is always the best solution to take into account different journal parameters, not just one. What that means: do not judge about some scientific journal according to just one value or according to just value of one parameter. That might be sometimes confusing. So if you have an access to impact factor, consider the impact factor, analyze side score, analyze quartile rankings in order to make a right choice. So what is impact factor? Impact factor is a number which tells how many times on average articles published in one journal 1 or 2 years ago have been cited. So let us see what is impact factor by this simple example. So let's say that we have a journal called Journal of Some Research, and let us calculate its impact factor in 2011. Let's say that that papers published in this journal received 250 citations for papers published in 2010 and 240 citations for papers published in 2009. And the total number of papers published in this journal in 2009 and 2010 is 100. So the value of impact factor will be 250 plus 240 divided by 100, which is 4.9. So this is an example how to calculate impact factor. The definition of side score is rather similar, but a different time range is taken into account. According to the newest methodology, side score is calculated taking into account the time range between 2017 and 2020. Before, it was calculated by taking the number of citations received in 1 year divided by the total number of publications published in a 3 previous years range. And you can say that it is to some extent similar as impact factor. Quartile ranking can be performed, as I said before, with respect to a selected parameter. The most frequently used and the most frequently mentioned quartile rankings are the one provided by the SCI Major. And these values, this quartile ranking has been performed according to the value of SJR parameter in covered subfields. Journal of Clarivate, the quartile ranking provided by the JCR is calculated with respect to the values of impact factor in covered subfields, and quartile ranking can also be performed according to the values of side score in covered subfields. So what this means, what I want to say right here, different scientific journals cover different subfields. For example, some journal dealing with physics covers the area of spectroscopy, and some other journal dealing with physics can, for example, cover the area of atomic physics. So to make a difference and make a classification on those journals covering different fields, different subfields, we frequently use quartile rankings. So the top 25% of journals are ranked as Q1. That means that the first 25% of journals with the highest values of SJR or impact factor or side score are located in the Q1 category. And the categories from Q2 to Q4 are going from 25% to 50, from 50 to 75, and from 75 to 100. Of course, it is always the best to publish in journals which are ranked as Q1, quartile number 1. So here comes the tricky question. What is a good value of impact factor or some other journal metric parameter? And that is actually a very simple question, but the answer to that is rather complicated. In my opinion, two answers can be given. Usually the students, your young students or young researchers will ask this question, what is a good value of impact factor? So I usually tell them the first and the trivial answer to this question is go for the as high as possible values. And of course that is a trivial answer because it is clear that as high as possible values of these journal metric parameters indicate that the journal is more scientifically sound, more scientifically relevant. The second answer that I give to them is the following. If a journal has any value of impact factor, it means the following. It means that it is run by a legitimate editorial board, it is covered by relevant databases, it is regularly checked by relevant entities, and its papers are cited by other studies. In other words, if journal has any value of impact factor, it has a scientific relevance because it means that other people, other journals, other papers are citing papers published in that journal. So that is important. And usually when students or young researchers see that some journal has a low value of impact factor, I try to explain them that getting a value of impact factor for your journal is very difficult because there are so many prerequisites you have to fulfill in order to have your journal for your journal to receive an impact factor. You have to have a diverse editorial board. You have to publish at least 20 or 30 papers per year. You have to, the prerequisites and the conditions are really hard just to become, just to get any value of impact factor. But of course, this is one more very important information. As I said before, there are hundreds of thousands of journals, but only around 13,000 journals have some value of impact factor. And an average value of impact factor for these 13,000 journals is between 2 and 3. So here are some extreme examples. This journal, called A Cancer Journal for Clinicians, has an impact factor value of 508, which is extremely high number. To publish paper in this journal, you have to have so strong scientific results, and these journals and these papers are usually dealing with very popular field such as fight to cancer. And Lancet is one more medical journal dealing with such, let's say, hot topics. Usually, students have heard for these two journals called Nature and Science. They have also very high values of impact factor, and it is very difficult to publish here a paper because you have to have really hot scientific results. But most of the journals have impact factor values lower than 10. So I stick to this number here, between 2 and 3, and I say to my students and young researchers, first condition is to publish a paper which has any value of impact factor, because that means that that journal has a scientific relevance. And in my academic neighborhood, in my area, my primary area is computational material science. If you publish a paper in journal with impact factor whose value is 2 or 3, it is a good result. It is a very good result, actually. If you publish a paper in a journal with impact factor higher than 5 or 6, it is extremely good result. And of course, if you publish a paper in journals with impact factors around 10 that is really good success. But one thing here has to be mentioned, and that is that there is a very big discrepancy between social and natural sciences. In social sciences, natural sciences like physics, chemistry, and mathematics are more exact sciences where you have more exact results. And therefore, many of subfields in natural and technological or biotechnological areas are more popular than some subfields in social sciences, and there is that discrepancy which has to be taken into account. On the other side, in social sciences, books as references are very popular, while in natural sciences, references are usually other research papers. So let's go back to that statement that you should always take into account more parameters when you make a choice about your journal. Let's say that we have two journals, Journal 1 and Journal 2, and let's say that the impact factor of Journal 1 is 1.5 and that the impact factor of Journal 2 is 3.5. One would say that Journal 2 is much, much stronger than Journal 1 because it means that on average, papers published 2 years ago have received more than double number of citations by other journals. But in the same time, Journal 1 can be ranked in Q1 category, and Journal 2, even though it has very decent and high value of impact factor, can be ranked in Quartal ranking as Quartal 3. So it means what these numbers tell us. Well, they tell us that both journals are important. They both have representative values of journal metrics, and both should be considered for publication of our results. But we have to check what are the subfields covered by these journals in order to check why this situation happens, that this journal has much lower impact factor but still is ranked as Q1 in comparison to Journal 2. Well, there are several reasons which might be responsible for that. And for example, it could be that Journal 1 covers less popular subfields. So remember what I said about social sciences. Social sciences, some topics, or let's not stick to the social sciences, let's, for example, compare the areas between mathematics and physics. Usually, topics coming from material science are on average much more popular than some topics from, let's say, for example, from numerical analysis. So the reason for higher impact factor but lower quartile ranking can be that this journal covers less popular subfields. Or it could be that Journal 2 has much more issues per year, so it reaches more readers. Usually, to get the value of impact factor, journals should have been published at least 4 or 5 times. Journals should have at least 4 or 5 issues per year, but there are some journals with dozens of issues per year, and they become more popular over the time. So that might be one of reasons why this discrepancy between impact factor and quartile ranking could be visible. Let me also mention one thing, that impact factor is not a perfect journal metric parameter, and that is the reason why we have quartile ranking, side score, and other parameters. There are dozens of articles dealing with pros and cons of impact factor, and some journals have even manipulated the number of citations in order to increase their impact factor. So indeed, impact factor is not a perfect journal metric parameter, but it is still widely used worldwide, and definitely the most popular one. Probably as popular as impact factor is quartile ranking according to the SCI major. But some universities, in my opinion, it is very important that university defines which journal metric parameters should be taken into account. For example, in Serbia, The most important journal metric parameter is definitely the impact factor, and the quartile ranking and site score are probably even not mentioned, which is wrong in my opinion. All parameters should be taken into account. So, speaking of journal metrics, we have introduced the topics such as impact factors, site score, SJR, and other parameters, but where we can find information about journal metrics. If I'm a young researcher and I want to find a proper journal for my research results, where can I find those parameters? And here we have a problem. Because site score and quartile ranking according to site score are available at Scopus, but Scopus is not a free service. Scopus is available to those universities for which a significant fee is paid, and that is a challenge. The same goes with for the impact factor. The Clarivate, the company called Clarivate, publishes calculates and provides the values of impact factors, but that is not free as well. You can check the impact factor on Clarivate website. You can check the impact factor for previous years, but you want to know what is the latest value of impact factor. Let me also mention regarding the impact factor that the latest value of impact factor is always the previous calendar year. And this is one service providing the most popular quartile ranking, SCI major, which is free for everybody, but it is using the data from Scopus, which is not free. But that shouldn't bother you. You can go to the website and see the SJR values for journals, and you can make a choice regarding the journal where to publish your results. There are also many other parameters available at this website. But as I said, still it is not as popular as impact factor is. So let me mention that all of these are great sources, definitely should be taken into account in choosing the right journals. And that is the fact that these services are not free motivated me to start my own project called Impact Factors Online, where I have collected the impact factors for all journals for the last 5 years. I have collected the latest site score values. I have provided the latest site score quartile ranking according to the covered subfields. And you can also find journals by covered subfields. You also have graphical representation, and soon it will be possible to print a report in a PDF. What was my motivation to do this? Well, scientists in Serbia have one service where we can check the impact factor values for all journals for the last 5 or 10 years, but that service is also not free, and that service is not working properly in the last few weeks. And I wanted to make something free for academics with no ads, but also at the same time very useful when you want to choose the right journal or to check what are the journal metric parameters for your journal for your needs are. So right now I'm going to present this tool. We will go to the impact factors online. So when you want to check the latest journal metrics of some journal, you go here. And then this program will be opened. And you can here type the name of your journal. For example, lately I have published several papers in Journal of Molecular Liquids. Press the search button, and you will receive the information about who publishes this journal, what are the ISSN numbers, and what are the values of impact factor. So we can see that this is very decent impact factor values. The site score is even higher, and the highest quartile ranking of this journal is Q1. And down here, you will see what are the categories which are covered, actually subfields, subcategories which are covered by this journal. So we can see that this journal publishes results from condensed matter physics, materials chemistry, spectroscopy, physical and theoretical chemistry, etc., etc. And as the latest, you receive the interactive graph which presents the latest the impact factor values for the last 5 years. So you can see that the impact factor value of this journal nicely increased over the last 5 years. So this is very useful tool to check how stable is your journal actually, how stable your journal is. When I say your journal, I think the journal where you want to publish your paper. Very soon, it will be possible to print a report about that journal in PDF. Actually, that can be done right now, but the result is not as efficient as I would like. This will print you the short report, but this I will deal with this in the next few days or weeks to make it even more functional. So this is very nice tool when you know the name of the journal and when, for example, your thesis advisor suggested you some journal. But what happens when you want to find some journal, when you want to find journals which cover certain subfields? Then you can use this other tool called Journals by Subfields. When you click here, you will have this drop menu. Click on the drop menu, and then you can find your area of interest. For example, I'm dealing with material science, so let me check, for example, materials science. Here it is, material science all, and then press search. And this tool will give you all of the journals covering the area of the subfield called material science all. Of course, this is very wide subfield. Let us, for example, check what are the journals in the area of insect science, for example. So we have less number here of journals. So there are 153 journals covering the subfield of insect science. And of course, let's say, for example, for embryology, we have only 16. We have only 16 journals covering the area of embryology. So if you want to, you can copy this, for example. Here it says that it is ranked as Q1 according to the size score. So you can copy it and check the impact factor value in this program over here. So the impact factor is also very nice, very high, 4.025. Size score is even higher, and the highest quartal ranking is Q1. You can see that it covers embryology, but it also covers genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, etc., etc. And here is the value of impact factor for the last 5 years, and an average impact factor value is here, also provided by this blue line. So you can see that this journal has stable and high and stable values of impact factor. Impact factors for the year 2020, as I said, you always have the latest values of impact factor are for the previous calendar year, and the latest values of impact factor for the year 2020 are practically for almost all journals are higher because they change a little bit the methodology for calculation of impact factor. They have taken into account the so-called initial citations, but we will leave that for some other occasion. So this is the tool which I made for the academics or for the members of the industry, where you can find latest journal metrics, and you can browse the journals by subfields. So as I said, the motivation was that these parameters, these values, these information should be free for all, and they should be especially available to young researchers who are trying to find their own journal where to publish their results. There are also some other resources of impact factors where you can find impact factors, but as I have been preparing for this lecture, I saw that they didn't update the latest values of impact factor, and those some of them are full of ads and are a little bit hard to be used, but that doesn't mean that they are not useful. By simple typing into by simple googling, you can find probably some other tools for these purposes. Of course, if you like this, you can follow it on the social networks. I will cover that later also. So let me go back now to my presentation. So no ads and free. These are some practices for students. I hope that there are a lot of students attending this lecture. So for you, I have prepared this, let's say, some small homework. I will leave this, you will have the video recording of this lecture certainly uploaded to the website of AIDASCO, so you can replay until this slide, and you can check these simple tasks, which can be fulfilled by using this tool called Impact Factors Online. Why is important to identify the name and the ISSN number of journal where you are going to publish your paper? Well, because once you identify the journal with the right values of impact factor, or quartal ranking, or site score, I mention impact factor the most frequently, but that doesn't mean that I'm promoting the impact factor. Use whatever parameter is respected in your own academic neighborhood. So once you identify the journal that has decent journal metrics and covers appropriate subfields, you can find the name by using the impact factors online. Then you can visit the official website presentation and find the following two things. You can read the detailed scope and guide for authors document. What is detailed scope? Well, detailed scope of each journal will give you information what type of manuscripts editorial office expects to receive. So there, the chief editor and the whole editorial office explains what kind of journals they would like to receive, and if you follow those instructions, then you will increase the chance to publish your results there. And then they also provide guide for authors document, and that document will give you all necessary information how to technically prepare your manuscript and how to format it. That is also very important, because once you submit your results, once you submit your manuscripts, the editorial office checks whether you have formatted, whether you have technically prepared it in appropriate way for them or not. The typical example might be the units used for measurements, for example. So of course you have the international system of units, but sometimes some quantities are more informative if some other type of units are used. So if an editorial office prefers to use international system of units, they will emphasize that in their guide for authors document. So that is why these things are very important. So let's go further. Remember, there are almost 13,000 journals with impact factor, and it is impossible to visit each and every website. You have to filter your selection. For example, we have seen that there are 455 journals covering material science area, and you cannot go through each and every website. You have to filter your results, you have to narrow the choice, and then you will have everything that you need. So right now, we are going to have a small break. I hope that is fine with you, because we have finished with the first session. So let me have your questions written to the our dear colleague from GLA University who is hosting this lecture. I think that a 5-minute break is fine if you are okay with that. Good afternoon. Yes, that is very nice question. Thank you for asking. No, there is no defined precise value of impact factor which would lead to the division in quartile ranking. They simply calculate impact factors for all journals, for those 13,000 journals, and then they say the top 25% are ranked as Q1 and the next 25% of those journals are ranked as Q2, and then goes Q3 and Q4. So there is no minimal value. They will take simply, as Q1, they will take simply the top 25% of journals. That is, of course, if you use the impact factor. But quartile ranking can be made also according to the site score or according to the JRS parameter. Thank you very much for asking that nice question. Yes, yes. That is very, very nice question. That depends on your academic neighborhood. let me say in that way. For example, the situation is different from country. Some countries prefer taking into account the impact factor. Some countries prefer quartile ranking according to the JRS, Journal Ranking System, by the SCA major. So that really depends on, for example, your faculty. Practically all faculties in Serbia, all institutions, all universities in Serbia consider only impact factor. And I think that is wrong. And there is one specific situation. For example, there are some journals which are ranked as Q3 or Q4, but they don't have impact factor. So those publications will not be considered by faculties in Serbia, for example. On the other side, I know that there exist some faculties, there exist some institutions which have forbidden the usage of impact factor because they say that impact factor can be manipulated, which is true to some extent. There are some ways you can manipulate the values of impact factor, but the company that calculates the impact factor have managed to find ways how to identify those journals who are trying to make a scam, and then impact factors are retracted for those journals. So, of course, as in every aspect of our lives, we have thieves, we have scams, and so the same things is in journal publishing. Because this is really, really expensive market. It is really serious market, and of course, there are some individuals who are trying to make scams. But as I said, once the authorities identify those journals are really seriously punished, and they don't have academic relevance anymore because people have heard that they try to manipulate the impact factors, and they have consequences. They definitely have serious consequences. So my suggestion would be to always go for impact, to check the impact factor and to check the fields which are covered by that journal, which you can see by using the impact factors online. And of course, make a suggestion, always check with your authorities which journal metric parameters are important for them. Because why is that important? Because you can finish bachelor studies, for example, in India. You can, for example, come to a master studies in Serbia and take a PhD studies, for example, in Germany or United States or any other country. And it is quite possible that different journal metric parameters will be discussed, will be considered for example, if you want to improve your position at the Serbian faculties, you will have to have higher values of impact factor. There is also one more classification of journals in Serbia. I haven't seen that classification on any other place in the world. That is actually division not to quartiles, but to terciles. All journals, with respect to the subfields they cover, are divisioned into three groups: N21, N22, or N23 in Serbia. And for example, in Serbia, N21 takes 8 points. It gives you 8 points when you want to apply for a higher position. N21 gives you 8 points, N22 gives you 5 points, and then 23 gives you 3 points. So, for example, I once published a paper in a journal which has impact factor almost 4, but it was ranked at that moment in time as N22, which meant that some journals with much lower value of impact factor had brought much more points to other people because they are ranked as N21. So you always should have take into account different journal metric parameters. So if we don't have any more questions, we can proceed with part 2. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, I hope that you hear me now and that you can see my screen. Can you please just confirm me that? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, right now we're starting with the part 2, which will be dealing with the manuscript submission. Let me just mention what we did in the part 1. We started with examination of stages that lead to a manuscript publication. So we learned in the first part, we learned something about some fundamental journal metrics parameters, which are necessary to make a choice of a journal where we will publish our results. One more stage, which is very important, is the manuscript submission. And remember that tip of the iceberg. So this is the end product, but the manuscript submission is under the sea level. And let us see how the manuscript submission process goes. It is also, I don't want to say complicated, it is not complicated, but there are several sub-stages. And why we are doing all of this, we want to understand how this editorial office process works, because if we know all of these stages, then we know what editorial office expects from us, and then we will know how to adjust our manuscript, how to adjust supplementary materials, how to adjust everything that needs to be adjusted in order to increase chances for publication of our manuscript. So this is the manuscript submission procedure. So let's presume that you have prepared your manuscript and you submit all of the results and all of the files you have prepared to the editorial office. In stage 1, editorial office receives the manuscript, and then in stage 2 you have the initial screening of the manuscript. In this part of the manuscript submission process, the editorial office, either editor-in-chief or associate editor or assistant editor, will check if your manuscript covers the subfields of the journal. In other words, the authorities will check whether your manuscript covers the scope of the journal or not. Is it compatible with the journal or not? If it is compatible, and if the editor finds that it has enough of novel results, it will send it to reviewers, or if he or she finds that it is not suitable for that journal, it will reject it. If it goes, what it means to go under review. Now we have come to the blind peer review process. That means that it is not the editor-in-chief or the editorial office who solely decides whether your manuscript is going to be accepted for publication or not. No. They will send your results, they will send your manuscript and all accompanying files to the experts to other experts in the field. Those experts will be anonymous to you. You will never know what are their names, where they work, or what they do. They will check your manuscript in details. They will write a report, and then they will suggest to the editorial office whether your manuscript should be rejected, accepted, or accepted after revision. So, if they find that if their opinion is that your manuscript shouldn't be published in their journal, they will reject it. And if they find it suitable, they will accept it, or they can find that your manuscript is interesting and within scope of the journal, and they can find that it might be useful for the readers of that journal, but they also could think that that manuscript needs some modifications in order to increase its quality. That is called the revision. In the revision stage, if they suggest revision, the manuscript will be returned to you with the detailed explanations on what to change, what to modify in order to increase the quality of your manuscript. So, what can reviewers say to you? They can say some rather technical notes. They can say increase the text size in some figure, remove some table, add some table, or they can suggest some more substantial revisions. For example, they can suggest you to do some extra calculations, to explain some parts of your manuscript better. They can, for example, suggest you to change the title of your manuscript. Maybe they don't like your title, they think that it could be more informative, etc., etc. There are many things that reviewers can tell you. That, trust me, I've seen a lot of comments. Some usually, in most of the cases, you will receive a rational and good comments. In what terms good? Good that they will help you. Those comments from reviewers will eventually help you to increase the quality of your manuscript. Of course, as anything in the existence, the manuscript submission and the review procedure is not ideal. Sometimes some reviewers will be biased. They will provide you with some non-constructive comments, but do not take it hard. It is just a procedure. There are many journals where you can offer your results, so don't worry. Always, no matter what are the comments of the reviewers, no matter how you like it, or no matter how you like it, or if you like it, or if you don't like it, never lose your spirit. In any comment from any reviewer, you can learn something new. And if you have that attitude, if you see things in that way, you will pave the way to the good journal for your results, trust me. And after you revise your manuscript, you send it again to an editorial office, and then the editor-in-chief or assistant editor or associate editor sends that revised work again to those same reviewers, and then they check whether you have increased the quality of your work or not, and then they suggest the final decision, and together with the reviewers, editorial office makes the final decision whether your work should be published or not in that journal. So, as you can see, manuscript submission is just one of the stages towards the publication of your manuscript, but it is also very complex. And I remember when I was submitting my first manuscript to a serious journal, and it lasted for several days. And then I had to Google each and every step and to find to find solutions for these steps. So now, when we know what are the stages in the manuscript submission, let us see what are the main elements of manuscript submission. So you have the manuscript, and that is the main file, the one for which you worked the hardest. Remember what we said about this part. You invested blood, sweat, and tears to get the results and to prepare the manuscripts. That is covered by the previous two stages. Then your manuscript is always accompanied by what is called a cover letter. So in cover letter, you introduce the editor with your submission. But unlike cover letter accompanying job application, it shouldn't focus on applicants' credentials. So your credentials, for most of the journals, are not so important. There are some journals where you have to be where you have to be a teaching member of faculty, where you have to have tenure in order to submit your manuscript. There are some journals, but in most of the cases, it doesn't matter whether you are on PhD studies or you have already acquired PhD level. So, for example, I have submitted my manuscripts and I have published a lot of papers before my PhD where I was a corresponding author, and those journals didn't care for applicants' credentials. They cared only for the quality of results, which should be that way. If there is anything specific that editor should know, you should write in a cover letter. That can be different things. And in a 2 or 3 sentence, it is always a good solution to explain the novelty and importance of your work. If sometimes some journals require that you write a novelty statement, they also require that you have what is called an author statement and that you have filled the conflict of interest statement. And I will go briefly through everything of this. In the novelty statement, they want you to explain what is completely new in your regarding the scientific part of your manuscript. The author statement is the statement in which you take the responsibility as a corresponding author that all of the co-authors of the work are aware that you are submitting these results to their journal and that they have nothing against that. Author statement can contain also the information what elements of the manuscript have been written by which author, and there is also a conflict of interest statement in which you state that you are not in conflicted state of any case with respect to the submission of that manuscript. Sometimes, rather frequently, graphical abstract is required as a part of submission. So this is actually the artistic part of your manuscript submission and manuscript preparation. So this means that you should summarize your work in one small and simple image. And this is the part of the manuscript preparation which I really like, because you can be really creative and usually scientists think that graphical abstract is not so important. They tend to think that it is just a one more unnecessary prerequisite to submit your manuscript, but young researchers think that frequently, but you're wrong. Trust me, graphical abstracts are very useful. When they are useful, well, they are useful when you have to read a lot of papers, when you try to explain something, some of your findings by reading many papers, and when you see that graphical abstract at the beginning of the paper, it is very useful for you to memorize what are the most important aspects of that paper. Together with manuscript, cover letter, graphical abstract, you will have to submit all of your figures. You can submit your tables and schemes separately, or you don't have to submit them separately. They can be in the main manuscript file. And you can also submit other files. By other files, for example, in the material science or in the computational material science, you have the opportunity to submit files which contain structures, optimized structures of the molecules or crystals which you have subjected to a set of calculations. For example, for experimental scientists dealing with XRD, they can submit crystal structures which they have found using the XRD equipment, etc., etc. I don't know what other files are usually in the area of social sciences. If there is somebody from social sciences, maybe somebody could comment briefly at the end of this part. What are the main elements of manuscript submission in case when social sciences, when manuscript covers social sciences? These are the main elements of manuscript submission. It doesn't mean that these are all elements. Some elements can be added, some elements could be excluded. For example, graphical abstract, as I said, is not always required. So, as you can see, from one side, we have the main manuscript file, but from the other side, we see that we have other files necessary to be submitted along with the manuscript, and it is necessary to be familiar with all of these elements. I would just like to say that regarding other files, you can also submit supplementary files. What are supplementary files? Supplementary files, well, it is actually a singular supplementary file. It is a file which contains all of the information that are useful and required for the reproducibility of your paper, of your results, but they, for some reason, take too much of space in your main manuscript file, so you have decided to place them in a separate file. Some journals have a limit on the number of the words which can be used in the main manuscript file, and some journals have the limit on the number of figures that can be placed in the main manuscript file, and in those occasions you also place all the excess figures, all the excess information into the supplementary file, which can be defined as other files. So this was the part 2. We went to the main elements of manuscript submission, but I would like to show you now, in the remaining of the part 2, how the interface looks like when you want to submit your manuscript file. We are not going to cover all of the details, that is not necessary right now, but let me just log into the website of one journal. Just a second, please. So, I'm going to type in Journal of Molecular Structure. By no means, I'm not trying to promote this journal. This is one of the journals where I have published a significant number of papers. There is no specific reason why I'm mentioning it right now, but this is only for the purpose of the presentation of how does the manuscript submission stage looks like. So when you type this into the Google will tell you, will give you the link to this journal, and this is very important part. And this part is also connected with the previous part, with the first part of this lecture, because this is the official website of this journal. This is a journal of molecular structure. And you have the information here, who is the editor-in-chief. This is the main person responsible for the running of the journal. You also have editorial board. Editorial board has to be diverse in order to be considered for getting a value of impact factor. You can see that there are 43 editors in 21 countries, coming from 21 countries or 21 region. So these are the editors, this is editor-in-chief. But what is important? What is important when you came to the first page of this website? Remember what I said. You have here a lot of information which will give you guides how to prepare your manuscript. Here you can click here, read full aims and scope, and here you can read what type of fields, subfields, and what are the elements of paper that should be submitted in your manuscript. Here you have all, practically not all, but very important information about the scope covered by this journal. So if you have chemical intermediates, molecules in excited states, biological molecules, polymers, those are all fields or subfields relevant for this journal. Of course, if you submit a paper from social sciences to this journal, they are going to reject it immediately because it is not covering the scope. So this is very important part of this lecture, because when you go to the first page of this journal or any other journal, they will have to have nicely defined scope. If the scope is not defined in an appropriate way, then it is very difficult for readers to understand what type of manuscripts are expected to be submitted to their journal. Here, the job is done very good, because once you read this, you will get the feeling what your manuscript should contain concerning the results. You also have information about journal metrics. You have the information about the site score. You have the information about the impact factor. You also have the information about what is an average review time. On average, how much does it take for your manuscript to be reviewed by other experts in your field. And there are also some other useful information here. So when I want to publish my paper, I prepare all of the papers and I go here, click here, submit your paper. And then I log in with my email and my password. And I click here, author login. And here I am. This is practically under the hood of the Journal of Molecular Structure. And then we, of course, press Submit New Manuscript. And this is how the interface looks. First, you have to select an article type of which you are submitting. So usually we are submitting research paper, original good research paper. But beside research papers, we have something what is called a review article. Review article is different, of course, much different than research paper. It also contains scientific results, but not the completely new scientific results. It contains the most important scientific results obtained by the author himself or by other authors related to a specific field. And what you see right here are these are the special issues of this journal, and special issues are usually related to some conferences. So if you have participated in Analyticon 2020 conference, then you have the opportunity to offer your manuscript to be published in a special issue of Journal of Molecular Structure. So let's go with the research paper. Let's go with the proceed. Forget about the ORCID right now. That is something which we will cover on some other occasion. And this is how it looks. This is how the manuscript, this is how the interface looks. So right here, you drag or drop files that you have to submit here, or you can go browse, and then you can upload all of the files, which will be considered by the editorial office. And in this part, you will upload the main manuscript file, you will upload the cover letter, you will upload figures, you will upload supplementary files, and all other files that you find it useful for the reviewers. And here you will you have the possibility to suggest the reviewers of your paper. Of course, the suggested reviewers are almost never contacted. They will always contact the reviewers they find suitable, but you can suggest some authorities in that field, and maybe or maybe not they will review your paper. In this part here you have additional information. If there is anything else specific what should be emphasized by this in this submission or comments you type in here, and then you, in the end, you have the opportunity to review everything that you have filled and everything that you have uploaded concerning the files in this submission, and then you click Approve Submission, and your manuscript has been sent together with all the accompanying files to the editorial office, and then you have those stages active, which we have mentioned in some of the previous slides. What happens once you click Approve Submission button? This stage has certain specificities. We are not going to go through all of them because it may be the amount of information would be really large, and there is no need to do that right now. As I said, the purpose of these parts of this lecture is to get you a feeling what should have been done, what should be done in order to publish your paper. So as you see, manuscript submission is one very important stage which has to be fulfilled, and it contains a lot of details which are eventually learned by try and error process. So right now I'm going to this is the last slide which we considered. So now comes the part 3. Since this part of the lecture wasn't so difficult and wasn't so long, I think that we don't need a break regarding the part 3, and I will be very glad to answer your questions right now regarding the part 2, regarding the manuscript submission. If anyone has some question, feel free to ask. Let me just mention, if you remember, if you don't have a question right now, feel free to write me to my email or to social networks. I will be very glad to answer. So questions, are there any questions? Okay, if we don't have question, if you have some question later, feel free to write me. As I said, there are many specific moments in this stage, and in all of these stages, so feel free to ask those questions later by email or something else. Okay, so let's go to part 3. Sorry. So in part 3, we are going to discuss some of the main elements of manuscript structure. So, and we will mention citing, and we will mention something regarding formatting. So let me go back again to this slide. This is the end product. We are now at the end. We are now starting to investigate end product, and it is always good to know those stages from 1 to 4, to know the details about those stages, because I repeat again, once you get familiar with all of these stages, you know what editorial office expects to receive. And not only what editorial office expects to receive, you, after some time, after dealing with all of these stages, you understand what reviewers look when they review your paper. So let's now let's examine one research paper. This is paper which Sanja and I published with Professor Koziel from Iceland and Poland in 2016 or 17th. Yeah, 17th. It is published in a journal which is published by Elsevier. So each and every published paper has information who is the publisher. If the name of the publisher is not emphasized well, that can be for many reasons. For example, there are some shady manuscripts. There are some suspicious publishers which only want to take your money, so they don't promote them and they don't emphasize their logos on the first page frequently. So here we have clear, nice logo of the publisher. Elsevier is one of the most famous publishers of scientific articles. So here is the information about the publisher. This is the name of the journal. This is the journal title. So it is a carbon journal. It covers various aspects of organic materials, nanomaterials, and organic molecular structures. These are the authors. And you can see this is the title of the manuscript. So each manuscript has to have title, and titles should be clear and concise. It should be informative, but it also shouldn't be too long. Avoid too long titles because when researchers read a lot of papers to try to explain some of their findings, they tend to exclude from the search papers with long titles, long or unclear titles, because that means that they should read the whole manuscript rather than just reading a title. So when I search the literature, I really like the situation when a lot of things are clear from the manuscript title. So beside the names of co-authors, you have these letters, and those are used to emphasize what are the affiliations. So what is affiliation? Affiliation is the institution in which you work and under which auspices you are performing research and publishing documents, whether it be reports, papers, manuals, or something like that. So my affiliation is University of Novi Sad. University of Novi Sad has 14 faculties. One of those faculties is Faculty of Sciences, and Faculty of Sciences has 5 departments. One of those departments is Department of Physics. This is the address. Some journals prefer to publish the address, some journals not. It really depends on the journal. Some scientists, some research scholars prefer just to write to which faculty they belong in the university. For some reason, I prefer when we have enough space to write to which department we belong, because on my faculty, on the Faculty of Sciences, departments are large structural units, and in my opinion, department should be mentioned, but in the end, it really doesn't matter too much, because it is the Faculty of Sciences who is being positioned on ranks and the university, not the department. And it is also important to mention that always at least one author is the so-called corresponding author, which means that that author is submitting the manuscript, and in case of any question, that if editorial office has any question, the editorial office regarding your submission, the editorial office will always contact the corresponding author. Most frequently, there is only one corresponding author, but occasionally there are some submissions where you have 2 corresponding authors. It is also possible that co-author has 2 affiliations or 3 affiliations, because some professors, some scientists are having engagement with other institutions as well. So, for example, here our colleague professor has 2 affiliations. One affiliation is from Iceland, and the other affiliation is from Poland. That means that he actively works for both institutions, and he's doing a great job at both institutions. Next, we come to the abstract. So the abstract is contains short information about your work. Usually, it is limited by journals in the amount from 150 to 250 words, but it is not a strict rule. So, and you have to think about all of these elements that you should know that all of these elements are specific for each journal. So, in case of this journal, I think that there was a limitation that it had to have at least 150 words, and the top number of words was 250. So, in the abstract, in a sentence or two, you write what has been done, what has been investigated, what research tools have been applied, and it is good when abstract contains some results, but not explicitly. A sentence or two about main findings are more than enough to be placed in abstract. But in the end, it is just a matter of your opinion and your attitude. What would you like to place in abstract? Usually, it might be, for example, it might be very wise to add a sentence or two about the main findings in your work, for example, in the form of trend. So, for example, if you study the absorption, I study absorption frequently, and then we have some certain quantity called absorption energy or binding energy. It is useful to mention which structure has exhibited the highest binding energy, but it is totally useless if I write in exact numbers. For example, the binding energy in case of that was 23 kilocalories per mole. That is not useful. The researchers do rarely remember numbers. They remember trends. They want to reproduce trends. So when readers read your abstract, they should have an idea what you have done, what tools you have used, and be it experimental or computational tools, and what is the main finding in your work. Other essential elements in of the manuscript is introduction. In the introduction, you introduce the readers with your work, and it is very important to explain why is your topic important. If they don't find justification why you are working on that topic, they will not read it, or the editor is not going to appreciate that. Why am I emphasizing this? Because with the development of science and technology, various scientific tools have become available to researchers, and some researchers do some science just because they can. For example, they investigate, for example, absorption, but they do not justify why they are investigating that area. Why is that important? And always keep in mind that you want to emphasize why is your research applicable. What are the main reasons why you are doing your research? For example, in the material science, if I'm investigating some new materials, or if I'm designing some new material, I want to clearly emphasize in the introduction why are those materials that I'm investigating important for the, for example, industry. After the introduction, there comes the chapter called Materials and Methods. In this chapter, you have to explain how you got your results. So, if you did some measurements, you have to explain how you measured your results. You have to explain in details which scientific tool, which scientific equipment has been used. For example, if you do calculations, as I am doing, I have to always mention which levels of theory I'm using, which approximations are being used. If I'm, for example, simulating the ultraviolet spectra, I have to clearly mention which, for example, density functional I have used. You have to mention in this chapter everything which would allow other scientists to reproduce your results. So the purpose of the Materials and Methods chapter is to make your results reproducible by others. If you do some research, and if you receive very good, very representative, highly representative results, they will be useless if some other researcher from other part of the world cannot reproduce that. And there is no point to do something which can be done only by you. So materials, you mention which materials have, for example, which materials have been used for synthesis of some new element, or if you are dealing with theoretical or computational aspects, you mention you must mention which software package has been used, and you have to mention which levels of theory approximations have been used, etc. In the results and discussion part, you present your results, and it is really a matter of choice, a matter of a style. How do you prefer to write, and how you prefer to present your results? But I have an advice for you, and that is use words and space wisely, and use graphs and tables wisely. There are types of researchers who like to describe everything, who like the descriptive way of presentation of results. I think that descriptive way is very important, but it has to be nicely complemented with graphs and tables. Do not use too much of graphs. Do not use too much of tables. Use like a healthy diet. Like a healthy diet. When you want to have a healthy plate of food, so you use different types of food. So this is the same approach should be used here. Use description. Use descriptive approach. Use graphs. Use tables whenever you can. Always try to identify if you have some interesting trend. For example, if I investigate adsorption on several adsorbers, I want to present those results in a form of a trend. So that is what researchers like. They like simple but clear and informative graphs and tables. Always try to complement your statements and findings with other studies. Why am I saying this? All that I said about presentation of your results, it is like a picture. Different artists will paint a different picture, but some will use one type of a paint, the others will use, for example, just a pen or pencil. It doesn't really matter. It is a matter of style, but it is always necessary to complement your statements and findings with other studies. It is always important to compare your results. If you just write what you have observed, it is going to be useless for other researchers. They want to know how your results compare with other studies. And that is what makes the writing of a good manuscript challenging. Because in order to do so, you have to read so many other papers. So for example, if I'm investigating binding energy of some molecules, when I receive results, I should compare them with other studies. If I just write that my binding energy is 20 kilocalories per mole, it means nothing to other researchers. But if I say the binding energy is equal to 20 kilocalories per mole, but the researchers reported the other value in some other study, then the researcher which is reading my paper will have other sources, he or she will be able to compare my results, the results from other study, and their own results. And that is how we build the scientific discussion, by comparing our results with other results. And let me tell you one piece of advice, which is very important. Never be afraid to compare your results with other results. If for some reason you think that your results are not well representative, do not be afraid to compare them with other results. You got what you got. Always check, double check, triple check your results. But if you got what you got, never be afraid to compare with other results, because that is what makes the scientific discussion sound. If we don't have scientific discussion, if we just write our observations, if we just report the numerical values which we have calculated or which we have measured, that such studies are useless to other researchers. So always keep in mind to compare with other results. Once you finish with the results and discussion, it is very important to summarize all of your results in a conclusion, in a conclusions chapter. So present your results in the conclusions, but in a shorter and a clear and concise and informative way. Again, use words and space wisely. This is a mistake. Do not use graphs and tables wisely in the conclusion. For some reason, this this was copied. So in the conclusions, present your results in a short way, and try to emphasize what is the most important. And here is one more important part of your manuscript, and that is acknowledgement. Young researchers and students usually forget to write anything in the acknowledgement section, but it is very important to have this section, because in this section you mentioned all organizations or people thanks to which you had resources to perform your research. So what can be mentioned in acknowledgement? In the acknowledgement you can mention the project, the grant which you are using, thanks to which you have purchased the equipment. You can mention if some colleague particularly helped you to prepare that manuscript, mention that colleague. Feel free to mention that colleague. It is very important, and to acknowledge all persons and organizations which have made it possible for you to do that research. For example, if you use, for example, supercomputing capacity of some laboratory, mention that laboratory. Mention all the people. This section is usually not long. It has 2 or 3 sentences. If you are mentioning, for example, I'm mentioning in all of my papers, I'm mentioning Ministry of Education, Science and Technological Development of Republic of Serbia, because that is the institution which has provided us with resources to perform this research. But always remember to mention the project grant. If the grant is very important, because the name of the grant or the number of the grant, depending on the ministry, is important, because you publish your results in order to justify the usage of those resources. So every now and then, if you're a project coordinator, you have to write reports, and in those reports you have to mention what has been done, not just experimentally or by calculations, but you have also to mention how many papers have been published and where they have been published. So pay attention to mention the grant. So these are the elements, the other elements, and I'm going to open that. Particular paper to show you how this is the initial version. Sorry, here is the. So this is the one of the papers, for example. So as I said, the first page has been discussed in details. So here is the introduction. And why am I opening this page? Because I want to mention something regarding citation, something regarding mentioning of the other references. You see, this is the introduction. And every now and then you see these numbers. What are these numbers? These numbers are denoting references which you are using in your work, which you are, these numbers denote the results obtained by other researchers, published in other publications, because it is impossible to do everything in science. You have to make a first step, and the first step is always to see what has been done by others. And whenever you write something which is not achieved by you, you have to mention that. You have to mention that fact. So if I click to number 1, it will lead me to the references section, where all the references which I had used for the writing of this paper have been mentioned. Okay, so here we have mentioned 71 research papers published by other researchers, and whenever we mentioned findings from those other studies, you have to mention that. When I say you have to mention, I actually say and mean you have to cite it. And those are citations which are counted for the calculation of impact factor. So my message is, whenever you use other people's results, you have to acknowledge them by citing their papers. How do you technically cite other references? That depends on the journal. So in this journal, this is the so-called numerical citation, where the other references are presented as numbers, and in the end of the paper, there is a references chapter where all the references are have been placed in order of appearance in the main document. It is very important to cite, because if you don't cite, you actually steal somebody else's results, somebody else's property. When I say, when you mention the results obtained by other, it means that you should rewrite those sentences in your own manner. Of course, if there is a need to use precisely the same sentence as in other paper, of course, place them in the quotation marks. But always try to rewrite those sentences in your own way, in your own style, and don't forget to cite, because citation of other papers is very important. Not just that you acknowledge the other people's blood, sweat, and tears, but you also make possible the classification of journals, because of course all of these calculations are calculated by certain authorities, and then the values of impact factor are provided. So this was the introduction part. Now I want to come to the computational details part. This is actually materials and methods chapter, but because this is a purely computational paper, there was no need to place materials, because we didn't use physically any materials. We designed new molecules and subjected them to a series of calculations. And here I am mentioning all of the relevant details. With this chapter, other researchers from this field can reproduce each and every result mentioned in this paper. That is why this chapter is so important. It contains everything you need to perform and to obtain these results. So here we have used Jaguar program as implemented in Schrödinger Material Science Suite. This should have been 2015, not 205. And I am citing the paper in which Jaguar was introduced to the scientific community. Of course, for DFT calculations, for other DFT calculations, I have used the other program called Abstract Density Functional Modeling Suite. We also used different levels of theory. All calculations have been performed with this functional and this level of theory. These moments are not so important for you, because you are probably dealing with some other scientific areas. I doubt that there are some people dealing with molecular modeling among the participants right now. But if you are dealing with molecular modeling, then these results are necessary to reproduce all of these results. And after computational details section, we have results and discussion. What is important about results and discussion section is that try to division all of your results in corresponding chapters. What that means? It means that in your research, in your manuscript, in your paper which you want to publish, you have different types of results. For example, you can have experimental results, you can have computational results. Separate them. If you have experimental results, place them in one chapter, place the computational results in another chapter. So this is the reason why we have chapter 3, and chapter 3 contains subchapter 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.5, etc., etc. But it is always good to separate the results, but try to find connections between them. And it is always good if you can draw some conclusions from different chapters and to mention them in other chapters. Try to find how your results are complemented. So if a finding from one subchapter can explain the results obtained and mentioned in the other subchapter, mention that in a sentence or two. Always try to connect your subchapters dealing with the results. Good papers, interesting papers, are always interconnected. Subchapters are always interconnected. In each subchapter, I can read something what is important for other subchapter, and it really keeps the attention on the way. And in the end, we are having conclusions. Conclusions are starting somewhere here. Here are the conclusions somewhere. It is mentioned which levels of theory have been used, what is the most important finding, etc., etc. I mentioned that, and this is the acknowledgement. This is the acknowledgement. At that moment, we had support by this company called Schrödinger INC, and this is of course, this is one more very important statement, because at that moment, these results have been performed thanks to these projects, 171039 and 34019, which was financed by the Ministry of Education, Science and Technological Development of Serbia. So it is very important to mention this, because later when I had to fill some reports, I had to mention that I have published certain number of papers in journals with impact factor, and in that way I earned my salary and justified the used resources, the resources provided by the Ministry of Education, Science and Technological Development of Serbia. And that's it regarding the manuscript, regarding the main elements of manuscript. I will go just to this slide once again. So as I said, I want to make a concluding remark. I want to, some of you will participate in writing of a research paper. And I want to think you about that research paper in the following way. Think of it as a thing that you are, imagine that you are an artist, imagine that you are a painter and that you want to create something, and that something is some beautiful paint. This is what we do in science, actually. Our paintings are actually research papers, and painters and artists offer their end products to galleries, and then galleries promote them. We do not offer our research papers to galleries. We offer those results to research journals, to scientific journals, and then they make a decision if they are going to promote our research or not. So think in that way. Why is, in my opinion, important to think in that way? Well, because of the following. Writing of a research paper, actually not just writing, preparing a research paper is a creative process. Don't think of that as a technical process. Don't think, okay, I spent some time in laboratory or in front of the computers, I did the calculations and that's it. Now I'm technically just going to write everything that. It is useless to think it that way. Always think that you are in the middle of a creative process, and be creative. What that means? It means do not write the same type of abstract always. Try to change it as much as you can for your next paper. And your mentor, your advisor will never be angry with you if you try to be creative. He or she may accept your proposal or not, but it will never be angry. He or she will never be angry if you try to be creative. Play with the images, play with the graphs, play with the tables. Use sometimes some interesting colors. Be brave. As always, in life, we have to be brave, we have to be creative, and think of a writing of a think about the writing of a research paper as a creative process. After all, you have creative parts. For example, graphical abstracts is pure art. In some journals, in some papers, graphical abstracts are made as a pure piece of art. And think in that way. In that way, you will all of those challenges which are in front of you in terms of writing a research paper will be easy to fulfill. So before we start this is the end of this last part of this lecture. I would like to ask you just to visit all of these links to support AIDASCO on social networks. If you like the Impact Factors Online project, please visit the website, recommend it, follow it, follow these, all of these on the social networks. Here you can have some links which are specific to me, so you can use them to contact me if you have some questions or any other ideas, what could be the next project, etc., etc. One way to promote the Impact Factors Online and to keep the ads away from the website is to visit these links and to support on social networks. So if you have questions, I'm open now for questions. Feel free to ask whatever you think it might be useful. Okay, if there are no questions, maybe later will be, so feel free to write me to my email. I just want to mention this slide again for students. If there are students or young researchers, try to focus to this slide and try to solve these very simple challenges. You can email me later, and I think you can I think that this tool can be very useful for especially the young researchers, because it is very rare that you have the information about the quartal ranking and impact factors and site score at the same place, which was my motivation to do this. So if there are no questions, I am finished. Thank you very much. I will use once again the opportunity to thank the management of the GLA University. It is really a pleasure and it is an honor to collaborate and communicate with all of you. I just want to mention that we started our collaboration with researchers from India in 2015. And so far we have published, Sanya and I have published together more than, I think, 80 or 90 papers, 80, 85, 90 papers in journals with impact factor, thanks to the collaboration with Indian researchers. And we learned a lot. I don't have the words to explain how much we learned from our dear friends and colleagues from India. And it was really enlightening and really motivating for our association called AIDASCO to sign the memorandum of understanding with GLA University. And with each of these events, we learn a lot, and we are very thankful for that. If there are students who would like to learn more, just feel free to write to us, and we will organize as many as necessary online events to cover all the fields which are useful for both to students from both India and Serbia. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.